The promotion slide changed on the screen, and my name vanished. I blinked, certain I had misread it. But no, where Valerie Brooks, senior director, should have appeared, another name glowed in bold letters. My stepmother, Diane, stood at the front of the conference room, her voice calm and measured as she addressed the executive team. After careful consideration, we've decided Valerie isn't quite ready for leadership at this level, she said, not looking at me. There are concerns about stability in her personal life that might affect her judgment. My face burned. Stability? What was she talking about? Around the table, colleagues avoided my eyes. My husband, Mark, sat 3 seats away, studying his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. He wouldn't meet my gaze. Applause rippled through the room for whoever had taken my position. The walls seemed to close in. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair. This wasn't a last-minute decision. The slide had been prepared. The announcement rehearsed. Someone had orchestrated this humiliation, and as Diane's lips curved into the smallest smile, I knew exactly who. My name is Valerie Brooks. I'm 34 years old, originally from Boston, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I knew exactly where my career was headed. If you want to hear how this story unfolds, please subscribe to this channel for more fascinating stories like mine. That evening, I drove home in silence, my mind replaying the meeting over and over. When I walked through the front door, Mark was in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing had happened. He glanced up briefly. "How was your day?" he asked, chopping vegetables with precise movements. I stared at him. "You were there, Mark. You saw what happened." He shrugged. "Office politics. It happens." I set my bag down slowly. "Did you know? Did she tell you beforehand?" "Val, don't be paranoid." He scraped the vegetables into a pan. "Oh, by the way, I meant to tell you I accepted that job offer in Chicago." Time seemed to stop. "What job offer?" "The one I told you about. Regional operations manager. Great opportunity." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. "I assumed you knew." "Mark, you never told me about any Chicago offer." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Start date was 2 weeks ago, actually. I've been flying back and forth." He finally looked at me. "I thought you'd be happy. It's a big step up." 2 weeks. He'd already started. Already signed contracts. Already made life-changing decisions without a single conversation with his wife. My chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. "Where in Chicago?" I managed to ask. "The West Loop." "Why?" "Just curious." But my mind was racing. Diane had mentioned at last month's board meeting that her firm was opening a Chicago satellite office. West Loop. The same area. I couldn't sleep that night. At 3 in the morning, I went to my home office and opened my laptop. Something felt wrong, and I needed to understand what. I pulled up the company's internal database and started reviewing recent memos and project assignments. What I found made my blood run cold. The Reynolds account, the massive healthcare contract I'd spent 8 months securing, had been quietly reassigned to Jessica Howard, Diane's personal protege. The documentation showed the transfer happened 3 weeks ago, with Diane's signature at the bottom. No explanation. No discussion with me. I dug deeper. The Morrison project, the tech startup acquisition, even the Westfield merger I'd negotiated, all reassigned. All credited to other people in recent reports. My department's revenue, the numbers I'd worked so hard to build, were now appearing under different names in the quarterly projections. Someone had systematically erased my contributions from the record. I opened a new document and began taking screenshots. Every reassignment, every altered performance metric, every piece of evidence that my work was being stolen. I organized the files by date, created a timeline, and saved everything to an encrypted cloud drive that only I could access. If this was a game, I would play it smarter than anyone expected. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with documentation, preparation, and patience. As dawn broke through my office window, I heard Diane's voice echo in my memory, concerns about stability in her personal life. How had she known about problems at home before I did? 3 days later, I worked late, finishing a presentation that didn't matter anymore since my projects had been taken away. Around 8 in the evening, I realized I'd left an important file in the conference room. The office was dark and quiet as I walked down the hallway. That's when I heard Diane's laugh coming from her corner office. I froze. The door was slightly open, light spilling into the hallway. I should have kept walking, but something made me stop just outside, hidden in the shadows. "Mark, you handled it perfectly," Diane said. Her voice was warm, pleased. The Chicago timing was brilliant. My heart stopped. "Mark?" She was talking to my husband? I wasn't sure she'd stay calm during the meeting. Mark's voice came through speakerphone, tinny, but clear. "But yeah, it worked out." Of course she stayed calm. She's too proud to make a scene. Diane laughed again. "And now everyone thinks she's distracted by personal problems. By the time she figures out what's happening, the Chicago consolidation will be complete and her position eliminated." "What about Mark started to ask something. "The investment? Don't worry. Everything's in place. Just keep her focused on the marriage problems while I finalize the board approvals." I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. They were working together. My stepmother and my husband had coordinated this entire thing. The promotion denial, the Chicago move, even the stability concerns that Diane had mentioned. Mark must have fed her information to make me look unreliable. What exactly was Mark handling for her? Sunday dinner at my father's house was a tradition I'd grown to dread. Dad remarried Diane when I was 22, and for 12 years, I'd watched her slowly take control of every aspect of his life, including his company. Dad had founded Brooks Consulting 40 years ago, and when I joined after business school, I thought I'd be building something with family. Instead, I'd been fighting for every inch of respect while Diane positioned herself as the rightful heir. That Sunday, she played her role perfectly. The loving stepmother, concerned and supportive. "Valerie, sweetie, are you feeling all right?" she asked across the dinner table, her hand reaching out to pat mine. "You seem tired." Dad looked at me with worry. "Everything okay at work, Val?" Before I could answer, Diane jumped in. "Oh, she's dealing with some changes. These things take time to adjust to." She smiled at Mark. "But Mark's career leap to Chicago is so exciting. Change can be difficult, but it's necessary for growth." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Good. Let him squirm. Some people resist change," Diane continued, looking directly at me. "But the strong ones adapt." I took a sip of water and smiled. "You're right, Diane. Adaptation is important." She seemed pleased, thinking I was accepting defeat. Dad nodded approvingly. Mark relaxed slightly. None of them saw the storm building behind my calm exterior. After dinner, my cousin Patrick pulled me aside in the hallway. "Val, I need to tell you something," he whispered. "I've seen Diane meeting privately with board members. Anderson, Freeman, and Wong. 3 separate lunches in the past 2 weeks. Did you hear what they discussed?" "No, but she was showing them documents. Looked official." He hesitated. "I think she's building votes for something." Monday morning, I received an email from Human Resources requesting an immediate meeting. My stomach dropped as I walked to the HR director's office on the 3rd floor. Brian Torres, the HR director, gestured to a chair with an expression that tried to be sympathetic but came off as uncomfortable. "Valerie, thank you for coming. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." "What concerns?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "There's been feedback from colleagues about leadership readiness. Specifically, concerns about emotional volatility and decision-making capability." He slid a folder across the desk. "We take these matters seriously, so we're conducting a formal review." I opened the folder. Inside were 3 unsigned statements describing my supposed behavior: erratic mood swings, inability to handle stress, questionable judgment in client interactions. "Who provided this feedback?" I asked. "That information is confidential." "Then how do I respond to anonymous accusations?" I pulled out my phone, because I have documented client testimonials that tell a very different story. "Would you like to see them?" Brian blinked. "Client testimonials?" "From the Reynolds account, the Morrison Project, and Westfield." all praising my professionalism, strategic thinking, and leadership. I scrolled through my phone. Here's an email from Reynolds' CEO calling me the most competent consultant he's worked with in 20 years. Would you like me to forward these? His discomfort was visible now. That won't be necessary. I wasn't aware. Of course you weren't. Because whoever filed this complaint didn't mention my actual performance record. I stood up. I'd be happy to provide copies of everything for your file. That night, I was paying bills when I noticed something strange in our joint checking account. 3 transfers had been made to an unfamiliar business, Summit Strategies, LLC. Each transfer was for $10,000, dated over the past 6 weeks. $30,000.
Gone.
Without my knowledge or approval. I searched for Summit Strategies online. The company was registered in Delaware with minimal public information, but after digging through state business filings, I found the connection. The managing member was listed as Brooks Consulting Group, Diane's consulting firm. Summit Strategies, LLC, was connected to Diane's Chicago expansion. Mark had invested our money, marital funds that required both signatures for large withdrawals, into my stepmother's business venture without telling me. Not only had he taken a job in her Chicago office, he'd become financially entangled with her firm. I took screenshots of everything. The bank statements, the business registration, the connection to Diane's company. Then I called our bank and requested detailed transaction records for the past year. When Mark came home 2 hours later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a printed copy of the bank statement. We need to talk about Summit Strategies, I said quietly. His face went pale. How did you find out about that? You used our joint account, Mark. I get statements too. I slid the paper across the table. $30,000. Were you planning to tell me, or were you hoping I wouldn't notice? The next morning, I called Andrew Fletcher, a family attorney whose office was downtown. I'd never thought I'd need a divorce lawyer, but here I was, sitting in his modern office overlooking the waterfront, explaining my marriage's collapse. Your husband used marital funds for a business investment without your consent, Andrew repeated, taking notes. And this business is connected to your stepmother's firm, where he now works?
Yes.
I only found out because I was checking our account. That's legally problematic, Valerie. In this state, significant financial decisions require both spouses' consent when using joint assets.
He leaned back.
But I'm more concerned about what you told me regarding your workplace situation. The promotion? The systematic removal of your contributions, the reassignment of your projects, and now this financial connection between your husband and your stepmother's company. Andrew tapped his pen. I think Diane may be positioning to buy you out of the family business at a reduced value. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. If she could make me look incompetent, reduce my visible contributions, and create personal instability, she could argue I wasn't worth my share when the time came. What should I do? I asked. First, separate your finances immediately. Open individual accounts. Second, document everything at work. And third, he paused, prepare for the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better. 2 days later, fate handed me an unexpected gift. An email appeared in my inbox that hadn't been meant for me. The subject line read, Confidential, Q3 Board Packet, Executive Restructuring. Someone had accidentally included me on the distribution list. Maybe an administrative error. Maybe divine intervention. Either way, I opened the attachment with trembling hands. The document outlined a complete reorganization of the company's leadership structure. The Chicago office would become the primary hub for client relations, with the Boston office reduced to administrative support. Several positions would be eliminated as redundant under the consolidation. My role was listed as redundant and recommended for phase-out by Q4. They were going to fire me. Not immediately, but slowly, quietly, making it look like a business decision rather than a personal vendetta. Diane had been planning this for months, probably since before she even denied me the promotion. But as I scrolled through the document, something else caught my eye. The financial projections for the Chicago office's first year of operation looked familiar. Extremely familiar. Revenue targets. Client acquisition strategies. Market penetration timelines. I'd seen these exact numbers before, because I'd written them. I searched through my old files and found what I was looking for, a strategic expansion plan I'd presented to the board 18 months ago. Midwest Market Opportunities, a 5-year growth strategy, written by Valerie Brooks, dated March of last year. The board had praised the analysis but ultimately decided against expansion, saying the timing wasn't right. Diane had been particularly vocal about the risks, calling my projections overly optimistic and lacking grounding in market realities. Now those same projections were in the Chicago expansion proposal under Diane's name. She'd taken my work, my research, my strategic vision, and repackaged it as her own brilliant idea. The numbers were identical. The market analysis was word for word in places. Even the client targeting strategy matched my original recommendations. I had timestamped drafts, email records of my presentation, board meeting minutes showing my authorship. Everything documented and dated, proving this plan was mine long before Diane claimed credit. She'd stolen more than my promotion and my projects. She'd stolen my intellectual property and used it to justify the very expansion that would eliminate my position. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. And I had proof. The next afternoon, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Catherine Brennan, CEO of Reynolds Healthcare, one of my biggest clients. "Valerie, I'm calling because I'm confused," Catherine said without preamble. "I received a letter saying you're transitioning out of your role and that someone named Jessica will be handling our account going forward. What's happening?" My jaw clenched. Diane had already started telling clients I was leaving. "Catherine, I'm not transitioning out of anything," I said firmly. "I'm still very much here, and I'm committed to your account." Someone shared inaccurate information. "Well, that's a relief." She sounded annoyed. "Between you and me, I also received a call from your stepmother pressuring me to approve the change. She implied you were dealing with personal issues that affected your reliability." She said what? I told her we were perfectly satisfied with your work and didn't appreciate the pressure. "We chose Brooks Consulting because of you, Valerie, not because of her." Catherine paused. "If there's some internal politics happening, you should know you have my support. If needed, I'll make that clear to your board." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, processing what I'd learned. Diane wasn't just repositioning me internally. She was actively trying to damage my client relationships, probably hoping I'd lose accounts and look ineffective. But Catherine's offer to publicly support me changed things. I wasn't as isolated as Diane thought. Friday afternoon, I walked past the executive conference room and noticed the door was slightly open. Curious, I glanced inside and immediately wished I hadn't. Diane and Mark sat together at the long table, papers spread between them, reviewing what looked like expansion contracts. The scene itself wasn't inappropriate. They worked for the same company now, but something about their body language felt wrong. Too comfortable. Too familiar. "These numbers are solid," Mark said, pointing to a page. "When do you present to the board?" "Next Thursday. Once they approve Phase 2, we can move forward with the equity restructuring." Diane smiled at him. "This is our future, Mark. Everything we've worked toward. Our future. Not the company's future. Not the Chicago office's future. Our future.
Theirs.
Together." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. What exactly was their relationship? Were they just business partners? Or was something else happening? The way Diane looked at Mark, the ease between them. It felt like more than just stepmother-in-law and son-in-law collaboration. I couldn't prove anything yet, but the sick feeling in my stomach told me there was another betrayal lurking beneath the surface, one I wasn't ready to face. That night, I confronted Mark as he packed for another Chicago trip. "I need to know the truth," I said, standing in the bedroom doorway. "What exactly is your relationship with Diane?" He froze, a shirt halfway into his suitcase. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you together in the conference room. The way you looked at each other. The way you talked about our future." I kept my voice steady. "Tell me what's really happening." Mark sighed and sat on the bed.
"Fine."
"You want the truth? Diane offered me a senior operations role in Chicago, but only if you stepped aside gracefully from your position here." Stepped aside. The words felt like a punch. She said the company needed fresh leadership, that you were too emotionally attached to your projects to see the bigger picture. She offered me equity and a path to partnership if I helped facilitate the transition smoothly. He looked at me without guilt. It's just business, Val. Just business? You're my husband. And you care more about status and titles than you care about our marriage, he shot back. When was the last time we had dinner together without you checking work emails? When did you last prioritize us over your career? I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time in years. You're blaming me for your betrayal. I'm explaining why I made the choices I did. He stood up and zipped his suitcase.
Diane's right.
You've never been a team player. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just watched him leave for the airport, knowing our marriage was over. But more importantly, knowing I needed to shift my strategy. This wasn't about saving my job anymore. This was about justice. Monday morning, I submitted a formal request to the board of directors. Request for comprehensive review of departmental performance metrics and revenue attribution, FI 2024-2025. The email was professional, detached, and impossible to ignore. I cited specific discrepancies in client assignment records and requested an independent review of project contribution documentation. I attached nothing, no accusations, no evidence, just a simple request for clarity on behalf of accurate company records. When Diane saw the email during the morning executive briefing, I watched her face carefully. She smiled, clearly thinking I was wasting time with bureaucratic complaints that would go nowhere. She controlled the narrative. She controlled the board. What could I possibly accomplish with a formal review? Valerie, always so detail-oriented, she said sweetly. Though perhaps that energy would be better spent on current projects rather than dwelling on past assignments. I believe accuracy matters, I replied simply, especially when it comes to client relationships and revenue recognition. Around the table, other executives shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to get involved in what looked like a family squabble, but I'd planted a seed of doubt. Why would someone request a formal review unless something was actually wrong? The board scheduled a special session for the following week to address my concerns. Diane left the meeting still smiling, but I'd seen the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. 3 days before the board meeting, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Anderson. The board member Patrick had mentioned seeing with Diane at lunch. Thomas had been with the company since my father founded it, and he'd always been fair to me. Valerie, I've been reviewing the materials you requested for the board session, he said. I'm seeing some discrepancies that concern me. Would you be available to discuss them privately? We met at a coffee shop away from the office. Thomas brought printouts of financial reports and project assignments, his expression troubled. This doesn't add up, he said, spreading papers on the table. The Reynolds account revenue is attributed to Jessica Howard, but the client contract was signed 8 months before she even joined that team. And these Chicago projections, they're remarkably similar to a proposal you presented last year. I noticed that too, I said carefully. I want to request an independent audit of the departmental performance records and the Chicago expansion financials, Thomas said. But I need to know, are you prepared for what that might uncover? This could get ugly, especially with family dynamics involved. I'm prepared, I said. I just want the truth documented. Thomas nodded. I'll propose the audit at the board meeting. And Valerie? You should know that Diane has been actively lobbying for votes to approve accelerated Phase 2 expansion funding. If we audit before that vote happens, it might delay or derail her timeline. That was exactly what I was hoping for. The audit began immediately. The firm hired Cornerstone Analytics, a respected independent auditor, to review financial records, project documentation, and internal communications. What they discovered in the first week made the board call an emergency meeting. The Chicago LLC had received internal firm funds, money that was supposed to be departmental performance bonuses, earlier than disclosed in official board documents. The transfers had been authorized by Diane using her executive authority, but without proper board oversight or documentation. Mark's investment from our joint account wasn't additional money. It was redirected from bonuses that should have been distributed to employees, including me. Essentially, Diane had taken company funds, moved them to the Chicago LLC, and then Mark had invested our personal money into the same LLC, creating a financial loop that benefited them both while depriving other employees of earned compensation. This wasn't just unethical. It was a governance violation, possibly illegal. When the auditor's preliminary report landed on the board members' desks, everything changed. What had started as a review of performance metrics had uncovered potential fraud. Thomas called me personally. "Valerie, this is much bigger than project reassignments. The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow. You'll need to be there to answer questions about what you knew and when." "I only discovered the financial irregularities recently," I said. "I believe you, but prepare yourself. Diane's going to fight back hard." The emergency board meeting took place in the main conference room, with all 8 board members present. Diane sat at one end of the table, perfectly composed in a navy suit, her expression confident. I sat at the opposite end, my folder of documentation resting on the table in front of me. Thomas Anderson chaired the meeting. "We're here to discuss the findings from Cornerstone Analytics regarding departmental performance attribution and Chicago expansion financing. Diane, the audit has revealed several concerning discrepancies. Would you like to explain the bonus fund reallocation?" Diane barely hesitated. The reallocation was a strategic decision to ensure adequate capitalization for the Chicago expansion. "I have the authority to make executive resource decisions within my operational purview. This is being characterized as irregular simply because proper paperwork wasn't filed in time. $30,000 in employee bonuses were redirected without board approval," Thomas said. "That requires authorization regardless of your operational authority." "It was always my intention to seek retroactive approval," Diane said smoothly. "Given the time-sensitive nature of the Chicago opportunity, I acted in the company's best interest." I remained silent, waiting for the right moment. Thomas turned to the rest of the board. "There's also the matter of the strategic plan that forms the foundation of the Chicago expansion. Diane, when did you develop this plan?" "Over the past year, working with our operations team." That's when I spoke. "Actually, I can provide documentation showing the Chicago strategic framework was developed 18 months ago by me and presented to this board in March of last year." Diane's expression hardened. "Valerie, strategic plans evolve. Just because you contributed initial ideas doesn't mean the current proposal is your work." "I'm not talking about initial ideas," I said calmly. "I'm talking about identical financial projections, word-for-word market analysis, and the same client targeting strategy." I slid a folder across the table. Original drafts, time-stamped and board-distributed, proving authorship. Before anyone could respond, the door opened and Mark walked in, looking confused. "I received a message to attend this meeting?" Thomas gestured to an empty chair. "Mark, you're here because your name appears in the financial documentation related to the Chicago LLC. Can you explain your investment in Summit Strategies?" Mark sat down stiffly. "I invested personal funds in a promising business opportunity. There's nothing irregular about that. Except you used marital funds from a joint account without your spouse's consent," I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. "And those funds were invested in the same LLC that received redirected company bonuses." Mark's face went red. "That's completely unrelated. You're making connections that don't exist." "Am I?" I pulled out another document. "Because the bank records show your investment was made 3 days after the company funds were transferred. And according to the LLC agreement, your equity stake is contingent on Brooks Consulting completing Phase 2 expansion under Diane's leadership." Thomas leaned forward. "Mark, is that accurate? Your equity depends on specific outcomes at this company." Mark fumbled for an answer. "The investment terms are complex. I don't have all the details memorized." "Then let me clarify," I said. "Mark was promised equity and a senior role in Chicago if I stepped aside from my position here at Brooks Consulting. He's testified to that himself." The room fell silent. Diane's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly, her eyes darting between me and the board members. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. "This is absurd," Diane said, but her voice shook. "You're turning a business decision into a conspiracy theory." "The auditors don't think so," Thomas said. He held up the preliminary report. They've recommended your temporary suspension from executive authority pending a full investigation into financial irregularities and potential breach of fiduciary duty. You can't be serious. Diane stood up abruptly. I built the Chicago opportunity. I secured the clients. I created the expansion strategy. With intellectual property that wasn't yours, another board member, Susan Freeman, said. And using employee bonus funds without authorization. These aren't minor procedural errors, Diane. These are serious governance violations. Diane looked around the table, calculating, searching for support. She found none. Even the board members Patrick had seen her lobbying sat in silence, unwilling to defend her now that the evidence was public. I want to review the evidence more carefully before any decisions are made, Diane said, grasping for control. You'll have that opportunity during the formal investigation, Thomas replied. But effective immediately, your executive authority is suspended. All decisions regarding company operations, client accounts, and financial matters will require board approval until this matter is resolved. Diane looked at me across the conference table, and for the first time, she wasn't seeing someone to dismiss or underestimate. She was seeing someone who had outmaneuvered her completely. Before we adjourn, I said quietly, there's one more document the board should review. I opened my folder and removed the final piece of evidence I'd been saving, my original strategic expansion plan from 18 months ago, complete with board distribution records, email timestamps, and meeting minutes showing my presentation. Next to it, I placed the Chicago expansion proposal with Diane's name on it. These aren't similar documents, I said. They're the same document with minor formatting changes. The market analysis on pages 4 through 7 is identical. The 5-year revenue projections match exactly. Even the risk mitigation strategies are word for word the same. I looked directly at Diane. This isn't about who contributed ideas to a team project. This is about intellectual property theft. Thomas picked up both documents, comparing them page by page. Other board members did the same. The similarities were undeniable. Diane, Susan Freeman said, her voice heavy with disappointment, you told us this expansion plan represented a year of research and development by your team. That was the justification for the accelerated funding timeline and the operational restructuring. Market analyses often reach similar conclusions, Diane tried. It's not unusual for. Stop, my father said. Everyone turned to look at him. He'd been silent throughout the meeting, but now his face was filled with something between grief and anger. Diane, I've sat here listening to you explain away every inconsistency, every irregularity. But this, he held up the comparison documents. This I cannot excuse. This is my daughter's work, her research, her strategy, and you presented it as your own to justify eliminating her position. Diane's composure finally shattered completely. You've always favored her over me. This company would have stagnated under her cautious leadership. I was doing what needed to be done. By stealing from her? By manipulating her marriage? By redirecting employee bonuses? Dad shook his head. That's not leadership, Diane. That's betrayal. Thomas cleared his throat. I'm calling for a vote. Given the evidence presented and the auditor's preliminary findings, I move to remove Diane Brooks from all executive authority pending completion of the full investigation. All in favor. One by one, hands went up. Every board member voted yes. Even the ones Diane had taken to lunch and lobbied for support. The evidence was too clear, the violations too serious. They couldn't defend her without jeopardizing their own positions. The motion passes unanimously, Thomas announced. Diane, you are removed from executive authority effective immediately. You'll retain your position on the board during the investigation, but you'll have no operational control over company decisions. Diane stood frozen for a moment, then gathered her belongings with shaking hands. As she walked toward the door, she paused next to my father. After everything I've done for this company. Everything you've done to this company, he corrected quietly. There's a difference. She left without another word, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the room. Mark started to stand, but Thomas gestured for him to remain seated. Mark, the board will be reviewing your role in these matters as well. Your investment in the LLC created a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed. We'll need a full accounting of your financial relationship with both Diane and Summit Strategies. I want to speak with a lawyer, Mark said. That's your right, Thomas agreed. This meeting is adjourned. As everyone filed out, Thomas approached me. Valerie, would you mind staying for a moment? The executive committee needs to discuss something with you. When the room cleared, only 4 people remained. Thomas Anderson, Susan Freeman, my father, and me. They exchanged glances before Thomas spoke. Valerie, the Chicago office needs leadership. The expansion is already underway, contracts are signed, and clients are expecting service. We need someone who understands the original strategic vision, someone with the credibility to stabilize what's become a volatile situation. He paused. We'd like you to assume interim oversight of the Chicago division. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The role I'd been denied, the promotion Diane had publicly declared me unready for, was now being offered to me under very different circumstances. The board would need to approve this formally, Susan added, but we believe you're the right person to lead this transition. You created the strategic framework. You have the client relationships. And you've demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and integrity we need. I looked at my father. His eyes were sad but proud. It's your decision, Val. No pressure from me. But you've earned this opportunity through your work, not through politics or manipulation. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation in the conference room when my promotion was denied. The betrayal of discovering Mark's deception. The long nights documenting evidence and building my case. The fear that I might lose everything. But I'd never been fighting for revenge. I'd been fighting for truth, for justice, for the recognition my work deserved. I'll do it, I said. But I want full authority over hiring decisions, budget allocation, and strategic direction. No executive oversight, no requirement to report to anyone except the board. Thomas smiled.
Done.
We'll formalize the appointment tomorrow. That evening, I went home to the house I'd shared with Mark for 6 years. Most of his things were already gone, shipped to Chicago over the past weeks without my knowledge. The house felt empty but peaceful. Mark called around 9 o'clock. Val, we need to talk about what happened today. I don't think there's anything left to discuss, I said calmly. Come on, don't be like that. Maybe we made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through the issues. Mark, you coordinated with my stepmother to sabotage my career so you could get a promotion. You used our marital funds without my consent. You lied to me for months. I kept my voice steady, emotion finally drained from this topic. This isn't something counseling can fix. So, what? You're just giving up on our marriage? No, I said. You gave up on our marriage the moment you chose your career advancement over your partnership with me. I'm just acknowledging reality. Val, I'm filing for divorce, Mark. My attorney will send papers to your Chicago address next week. I think it's better if we don't communicate directly after this. I paused. Partnerships require loyalty. You chose yours. Now I'm choosing mine. I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, he came by to collect the last of his belongings. We didn't speak beyond logistics. When he drove away, I felt relieved rather than sad. Some endings aren't tragic. They're necessary. 2 weeks later, Brooks Consulting issued a formal announcement to clients, staff, and industry partners. The press release was professional and measured, revealing only what needed to be public. Brooks Consulting announces leadership transition. Diane Brooks has retired from her executive position to pursue other interests. Valerie Brooks has been appointed Senior Director of Midwest Operations, overseeing the Chicago office expansion. The company remains committed to excellence in client service and strategic growth. Behind the scenes, the full investigation had concluded. Diane accepted a permanent retirement package that included surrendering her executive role and selling back her company's shares at a fair market value. She avoided criminal charges by agreeing to repay the redirected bonus funds and signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Mark resigned from his Chicago position before he could be terminated. His equity stake in Summit Strategies was voided due to the conflict of interest violation. The LLC itself was dissolved, its assets returned to Brooks Consulting's control. My clients reaffirmed their partnerships publicly. Catherine Brennan sent a company-wide email praising my leadership and announcing Reynolds Healthcare's expansion of their contract with Brooks Consulting. Other clients followed suit. The Chicago office opened on schedule, with me leading the team I'd assembled personally. No more of Diane's protégés or Mark's convenience hires. Just talented people who earned their positions through merit. On opening day, I stood in the new office overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the city wake up below me. My phone buzzed with congratulations messages from colleagues, clients, and even a few board members. One message was from my father. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Your mother would be too." 3 months after the Chicago office opened, I received an unexpected email requesting a meeting. Diane wanted to see me. Just once. Privately. I almost declined, but curiosity won. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory where neither of us had an advantage. Diane looked older somehow, the stress of the past months visible in new lines around her eyes. She ordered coffee and waited until I sat down before speaking. "I wanted to tell you that you planned this," she said. Not quite an accusation. Almost admiration. "No," I replied. "I prepared. There's a difference." She studied my face, searching for something. "I underestimated you. I thought you were like your father, talented but too soft for real competition, too concerned with being liked to make hard decisions. You mistook kindness for weakness," I said, "and patience for complacency." Diane nodded slowly. "What will you do now? Continue building the Chicago office? Wait for your father to retire and take over the whole company?" "I'm going to do my job," I said simply. "Lead my team, serve my clients, build something meaningful. The same things I was always trying to do before you decided I was a threat." "You were always a threat," Diane admitted. "From the moment I married your father and realized how capable you were. I knew eventually you'd eclipse me, so I tried to eliminate you first." She took a sip of coffee. "I should have just worked with you instead of against you." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was closer than I'd expected. "Maybe," I said. "But you made your choice, and I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences." Diane stood, leaving money for the coffee on the table. "For what it's worth, you'll be a better leader than I ever was. You have something I lacked, integrity." She walked out of the cafe, and I watched her go, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of closure. They had tried to make me look unstable, to frame me as someone too emotional and unreliable for leadership. Instead, through their betrayal, they'd forged me into something stronger. They tested my patience, my strategic thinking, and my resolve. And I'd proven that the strongest response to betrayal isn't anger or revenge. It's preparation, documentation, and the unshakable commitment to truth. They wanted me unstable. Instead, I became unshakable.